So what I've wanted to address in this presentation is really some thoughts and questions really on the relationship and the distinction between traditional cooperatives with a designated membership and very often, a geographic locale, and platform co-ops and digital systems. And so I've been reflecting on elements in traditional co-ops that lead to their failure. Structural elements, elements around member relations, around governance, and so on, and how those factors actually relate to the establishment and operation of platform co-ops. And just to basically raise some questions and start a process of reflection and critical reflection on the degree to which a conventional cooperative model can actually be replicated in the context of a digital system and a platform co-op or an open co-op. So traditionally, co-ops, as many of you know, are composed of two fundamental dynamics. One is around social relationships and social solidarity, a community of interest among people that share social relationships, very often face-to-face social relationships in a community, and economic utility, a group of people coming together, organizing a co-op so that they can provide themselves with some kind of an economic or social service or use. And so social solidarity on the one hand and economic utility on the other are the two primary components of traditional co-ops. And the question I was asking myself is, are both of these really necessary for the operation of a successful cooperative platform, for example? And what happens when one of these is absent? What are the implications for that? And how does that also relate to the survivability of the structure? This is not working. Do I just? No, it has. It's working. Oh, okay, great. Oh, I have to do it here as well. Yeah. I'm such a futz. Okay. So, just a couple of, just to remind ourselves, what are some of the reasons that co-ops fail? Poor management, poor access to investment capital, very often the undercapitalization by members, underinvestment by members in the co-op, very often risk aversion by members, the absence of long-term commitment among the membership, the loss of member control, or a meaningful decision-making relationship among members for the operation of the co-op. The loss of co-op culture and co-op education is a hollowing out of the social and cultural conditions that sustain co-ops over time. And the capture of the system by managers or decision makers and boards of directors that really have a diluted interest in the co-op as a alternative, collective, democratically owned system, and are more interested or more concerned around, commercial or success within, the market for the survival of the co-op. And then, of course, ultimately, poor market performance. Now, these elements are, in my experience, the most common sources of co-ops failing. But the point I'm raising around understanding those features is that many of these actually stem from a failure of social connection and social relationship among the members of the co-op. Relatively few of them have to do with market failure per se. They have to do with the ways in which the members of a co-op actually relate to each other and how they create a collective community of shared interest, shared governance, and how they operate that system. So the question of the nature and the quality and the character of the social connections and social relations among members in a cooperative system is absolutely fundamental when we're talking about traditional co-ops. So how does that relate to a platform co-op or an open sort of digital system that serves collective interests. Characteristics of, so the question being, are platform relationships the same as face-to-face relationships? And how, if they're different, how does the difference affect the viability of a co-op form, and in particular, the viability of a platform co-op? A key question for me has been, how do platform co-ops actually create sustained social relationships among users, and to what degree is this actually possible? Is an online social network, does it have the same capacity and quality and meaning for members in a co-op as it would in a conventional co-op? And I think a key question for me also is, how do platform co-ops actually avoid being merely utilitarian systems? In other words, they provide a service or a benefit to members, but that's the primary attraction for participation in a platform co-op. If that's the case, what are the implications for the survivability of this? And throughout the day, we've been hearing a fair bit of commentary around the capacity and the meaning and the role of platform cooperativism as a vehicle for system change, for initiating more powerful forms of democratic governance, for example, for planning and citizen participation in local community and reforming public spaces of cities and so on. But these are essentially political projects. And the question I'm asking is, can a political project be sustained with a membership that is ephemeral, that kind of comes and goes on the basis of what the utilitarian system actually provides them in terms of, economic or other kinds of benefits? If there's an absence of this kind of social relationship and social solidarity that we find very often as the cement that really makes traditional co-ops work, and especially passing through very rough times, whether they're organizational or market or whatever, the social connection is absolutely fundamental. If that is not recreated in the modality of a platform co-op, how do they take on then these political campaigns and play a political role around system change if those kinds of social connections are fundamental to that? It's a question. I don't have an answer to that, but it's something I think that is important to consider. And then all platform co-ops are not the same. They provide different kinds of services to their users. For example, a platform system co-op where you have a group of contributors to the design of a new app or a software system isn't the same as a co-op, platform co-op that is actually used as a enabling system for the provision of information to doctors, for example, or the provision of healthcare services, or for facilitating and coordinating the provision of social services that are facilitated through a digital co-op system. So those kinds of uses, I think, have different implications for the importance of social connections, social solidarity, and social relationships. And then, again, how do platform co-ops ensure fair labor practices among users? Because those two are essentially an agreement to implement and enforce a series of social connections and relations among users. They're not simply, the system doesn't simply provide access to some kind of a utilitarian service, information, whatever, and then they simply withdraw when that is, when they've received that service, and then move on to something else. So I guess the proposition I'm making is, if a platform co-op is primarily utilitarian in nature, is it also socially unstable? If this is true, then obviously there's implications for the role that platform co-ops play in system change, in political work, right? Regarding decision-making and the direction of the system, size matters. The larger the system, the more complex the system, the larger the scale, the harder it is to maintain member commitment, the kind of social and solidarity relationships that are so important for traditional co-ops. That becomes a very difficult proposition in very large systems. If, however, the platform co-op is primarily a utilitarian system for the provision of very limited and confined sorts of practical services for the members and the users of that, and it is not primarily a social relation that is facilitated by the co-op, then perhaps that isn't important. But I think it is important to understand the different uses and the different dynamics that are driving the design and use of these systems. And then finally, without this social solidarity factor, the kind and the quality of social relationships that the co-op maintains among its members, how does that system prevent the capture of the platform by elites? How do you hold people accountable in those kinds of systems? And when the social factor is important, and it is part of the culture and the meaning and the value of that platform co-op, how do you enforce or implement the kind of efficiency of large scales across these systems and still maintain the kind of social solidarity and social connection that is so vital to the culture and the operation of traditional co-ops, at least? All right, and I'll just maybe leave it with this. The interface of cooperative practice and commons values is something that I and others, many others in this room have been sort of researching and thinking about and working on for a number of years. But how do they relate to political economy in the information age? And this is, I think, the underlying dynamic that is propelling a lot of the interest and a lot of the passion in these conferences and in an assessment of P2P systems and platform co-ops as vehicles for substantial systemic change in our political economy. And the question I have is, to what degree is that actually possible, given this dynamic between social connection, social solidarity, and the political dimension of that, and primarily utilitarian design and purpose for platform co-ops? So these are just things that I'm just really kind of wondering about and struggling with. I don't have answers to them, but I think we can draw lessons from traditional co-ops and their history of evolution and failure to try and adapt some of those lessons to the intrinsic dynamics and designs of platform co-ops, particularly with respect to this connection between social relationships, social solidarity, and the function of economic utility within those structures.